This video is on the endocrine system and forms part of the evolution of organisms topic, particularly covering those parts of chapter 18. So in the course handbook, we have a number of different areas to look at here. One is just around the general understanding of the endocrine system, and then how some of the hormones released control different functions. The next video and the next set of slides will go into some details about some specific examples of hormone and endocrine control and more general control systems within the body. But those ideas are introduced here. So hormones are produced from glands, and these form the endocrine system. Endocrine system is a control mechanism for coordination of body actions and maintenance of homeostasis. So glands are specific tissues that are found in different parts of the body, including the pituitary and the pineal gland, which are located in and around the brain, thyroid gland, pancreas, adrenal glands, and then others, including the gonads involved in sexual reproduction. So each of these tissues is specialized and has special cells in it, endocrine cells, which can release hormones. There's 4 different hormones here as examples, showing the different kinds of things that hormones can control, including heart rate, and blood pressure for the adrenaline, which is also known as epinephrine, metabolic rate from thyroxine. Insulin and glucagon are involved in controlling glucose within the blood, and antidiuretic hormone involved in water balance. And all of these, again, are part of the homeostatic control mechanisms. So why do hormones get released from those glands? Well, there's a number of different mechanisms that can trigger the release of hormones. So in this one here, humoral stimulus, so that there's some sort of stimulus coming from the blood, a lack of something or an excess of something that are detected by the gland and that trigger the release of hormones. Or neurons here, so there's an interface between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Neurons might innervate or send nerve signals to particular glands, and when those glands are stimulated by the nervous system, they could release their hormone into the blood. And the next one here, last one, is around glands being stimulated by hormones from other glands. So in particular, we have the example of the pituitary gland, which is connected to the hypothalamus in the brain. When the pituitary gland is stimulated, it releases high order hormones, which then flow through the body to other glands, and that will then release secondary hormones. So the pituitary gland is like a master gland that sends out hormonal signals that causes other glands to then release their hormones, and that allows it to control high order body functions like overall growth, sexual maturation, puberty, lactation, menstruation, things like that. So when glands release their hormones, how does that work? So individual cells, the endocrine cells, will release the hormone via an exocytosis process that diffuses through the extracellular fluid into the bloodstream, and that carries it throughout the whole body, and the hormone will diffuse throughout the whole body. It will then be available to bind to receptors on target cells that are either on the plasma membrane or inside the cell. But only the target cells have these protein receptors for the hormone. All the other cells of the body that are receiving the hormone diffused to them may not respond because they don't have the particular receptor. Only the target cells do. Now, what happens from there depends on what type of hormone we're talking about. So this is a good point to introduce some of the different hormone types. So some hormones are proteins. So here's a string of amino acids that are together to make this particular example of secretin. Some are parts of proteins, peptides or polypeptides. And so these peptide and polypeptide and protein hormones are one category, and they will bind to a receptor on the plasma membrane. Some are derivatives of amino acids. So here's epinephrine, which is the chemical derivative of the amino acid tyrosine. That also is similar in structure, being one amino acid, and that will also bind to a surface receptor and can't travel through the plasma membrane. But there's a whole class of hormones that we call steroids. These are chemical derivatives of cholesterol. Cortisol is one, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, many examples of those. These are chemical derivatives of cholesterol, which is lipid soluble. So cholesterol is found within the plasma membrane, and these steroid hormones can diffuse through that membrane. And so their receptors aren't on the plasma membrane, they're actually receptor proteins inside the cell. So whether it's on the membrane or inside the cell, similar kind of things happen when that hormone receptor binding takes place. There's a signaling cascade that then takes place that changes how that cell works. So for this one, the hormone's bound to the receptor on the protein. That's activated some secondary proteins, causing a signal transduction pathway that will then finally activate this protein in the chain that may change gene regulation or cause a cytoplasmic response. Similar kind of ones with the lipophilic hormones. Here it diffuses in, meets up with its receptor that goes into the nucleus and changes that gene regulation, leading to the production of a new protein in some way. So when hormones activate cells, they can change gene expression, make new proteins. If those proteins cause changes in the growth cycle and controlling the cell cycle, if you remember from previous topics, that will increase the growth rate or stop the growth rate. That can make tissues grow. They also might change the function of a cell. When it's expressing a new protein, it could change the structure or function inside that cell. And finally, they might cause a cell to secrete something as well, so including another hormone. So by changing the structure and function of the cell, you can have a lot of physiological downstream effects, changing the way the tissue works and the way the body works. This table is a little bit of a summary then. Now we've covered both the nervous system and the endocrine system. I'd like you to go through it line by line. I'd also like you to perhaps test yourself on this. Write down some of the headings around signaling cells and the chemical signals and the pathways. Fill in the blanks and see if you can test yourself. So these two control systems, the nervous system and the endocrine system, are very important. They have different mechanisms of action, but they also work together. Again, in the next video, when we're looking at different control systems, we'll look at the interface between those and how they can coordinate and cooperate to regulate body's functions and maintain homeostasis.